Every congressional candidate says bipartisanship is important. Can you name who your favorite Republican is?
Paul Anderson actually, I think, is very, look, before I keep naming names, because there are a few. I was really fortunate to have worked with a lot of great Republican colleagues. In terms of the legislation that I passed, close to 70% of the legislation that I passed was signed under, of course, a Republican governor. And that wasn't just by working with Democrats. You have to be able to work with Republicans as well. I mean, but here's the thing, is that we need to, we're not going to get rid of the two, and of course, you know, sometimes you want to expand it to more parties so that we have choices. But we have to work with, hopefully, moderate and reasonable Republicans. They're not going away. they're going to be there forever. And if we're going to work with Republicans, then we need to bring back the kind that are reasonable and that are willing to meet in the middle and actually have educated conversation about these issues. The current Tea Party Republicans, Crescent Hardy, I absolutely put in that extremist part of the party. Those folks need to go. We cannot work with those folks. They're unreasonable. They will not consensus, and working together is just a word that's not in their vocabulary. And so those Republicans who have been reasonable and have been able to work with, like Paul Anderson, like the, gosh, and I'm blanking his name, Assemblyman from Pahrump, Oscarson, James Oscarson, they were partners of mine in various pieces of legislation. And those are the kinds of folks that I think that we should not only have, but are willing to work with us and that we should have in this process.
Okay, Ruben?
First, let me say that I'm proud to be a Democrat, I'm proud to be a progressive Democrat, and I'm proud to have championed progressive values throughout my 10 years in the legislature, 4 years in the Assembly, 6 years in the Senate. With that being said, you know, I want to say, you know, I like some Republicans. You know, and one of those Republicans that I think I want to say is one of my favorite is Ronald Reagan. And I'll tell you this, I would not be standing here today if it weren't for the 1986 amnesty immigration reform that passed. My family came to America when I was 8 years old, and we became legalized residents. My father, who is here today, he was a farm worker in the fields of California. And he became a legalized resident of this country thanks to that Ronald Reagan 1986 amnesty. When Republicans, when presidential candidates at that time were reasonable, where they were willing to listen to immigrants, when they were a little more inclusive. But now you're seeing a division. You're talking about two Latino presidential candidates, you know, Rubio and Cruz, two sons of immigrants who are talking about who can keep the most immigrants out of this country. You know what? Ronald Reagan would be upset. He would be disappointed with this Republican Party today.
I'm going to answer my question based on this last legislative session. I've lived in Las Vegas and Nevada for 23 years. The majority of my work has focused on education and getting more investment in education in the state. You know, anyone who's lived and worked here, we rank 50th in education attainment, and it's no surprise that we also don't fund education at that level. So that being said, there's a few Republicans who were in this last legislative session who helped get the tax bill through and helped get additional funding for education into our community. And you know, I'm not going to say I love them, I'm going to hang out with them, but I do admire that they took some tough stands and they pushed through the legislative bill. I look at Becky Harris, who was at the head of the Education Committee. I thought she exhibited some decent leadership getting some of those quality bills through the legislative session.
So I was fortunate enough to be able to work with some of the legislative greats in my career. You know, before term limits, people served a long time. One of those was Bill Raggio. And, you know, he never treated me like a a Democrat on the other side. He treated me like a colleague and a friend, and we worked together to pass some good legislation. He always protected his district and his people, but I think Bill Raggio would roll over in the grave with some of the things that these guys that we're talking about now in the last couple legislative